Alina lived at the edge of the great forest, where the sunlight filtered through towering trees, scattering patterns of gold and green across the earth. From a young age she had a deep connection to the life around her. Birds would perch upon her shoulders, humming soft melodies, and small animals followed her footsteps, sensing her gentle heart. Her laughter, light and melodic, often carried across the village, blending with the wind rustling through the leaves, and villagers would smile at the sound as though the forest itself had gifted it to them. Her hands were always busy tending to injured creatures, coaxing seedlings to grow, and helping the elderly in the village with tasks too heavy for their frail strength. Alina's presence was a balm to all who knew her, and her innocence and warmth became the heart of the small community. Her stepmother, Morana, watched all this with growing unease. Though Alina's father often praised her, Morana could not contain the jealousy gnawing at her. She noticed how neighbors would linger when Alina passed, how the elders would nod with approval at her acts of kindness, and how even children would skip along behind her, giggling in delight. The contrast between Alina's radiant spirit and her own carefully constructed poise made Morana's envy burn like a hidden fire. She told herself that she must protect her daughter Lyra's future, but deep inside she feared that Alina would outshine them all, and that the villagers' loyalty might shift entirely to the girl who seemed to belong to the forest itself. The whispers began slowly, subtle as a wind weaving through the branches. Some villagers spoke in hushed tones, suggesting that Alina was a child watched over by unseen spirits. "The forest itself protects her," they said. "See how animals follow her? See how the wind bends to her laughter." Such murmurs filled Morana with irritation and anxiety, for they undermined the control she thought she held in the household. She could see that her schemes would need cunning, for Alina's natural charm and gentle ways made it difficult to speak ill of her without appearing cruel. Despite Morana's envy, Alina remained unaware of the shadow looming over her. She would wander along the forest's edge, barefoot and light on her feet, feeling the soft moss beneath her toes and letting the wind tug gently at her hair. She greeted every creature she encountered with a warm smile, and in turn they offered her companionship. A deer would nuzzle her hand, birds would gather to sing beside her, and even the shy forest fox would approach without fear. Children of the village often tried to follow her, but they soon realized that Alina's bond with nature was unlike anything they had seen. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the horizon and the forest became a tapestry of shadows and fading gold, Alina would sit by the riverbank, her reflection shimmering among the reeds. She would hum softly, a tune that seemed to echo from the deepest heart of the woods, and the river would ripple in time with her song. The villagers, peering from a distance, often said that her voice had the power to calm even the most troubled heart, and some whispered that it could call forth life from the earth itself. Alina's innocence and innate goodness seemed to weave a magic around her, though she did not understand it herself. Morana, unable to tolerate the admiration Alina inspired, began to weave her jealousy into quiet plots. She would make casual remarks to villagers about the girl, suggesting that her connection to the animals and the forest was unnatural, that it might be a sign of favoring the spirits above humans. Yet no one truly believed her. Alina's sincerity and kindness could not be overshadowed by whispers and half-truths. Morana fumed silently, her hands twisting in worry as her daughter Lyra tried to emulate Alina but could never replicate her warmth. Alina's days were filled with tending the small garden by her home, gathering herbs, helping neighbors, and wandering along the forest's edge. She would pause often, listening to the wind rustle through the branches, or to the chatter of the river. She spoke to the animals as if they were old friends and felt the pulse of life in the leaves and soil beneath her fingers. At night, when the village slept and the moon rose above the trees, casting silver light across the forest floor, Alina would lie beneath the canopy and gaze at the stars peeking through the branches. She felt their silent watchfulness, as though the forest and sky were conspiring together to keep her safe. Even as Morana's envy simmered, the villagers' love for Alina grew. Mothers would tell their children tales of the girl who walked with animals and listened to the wind. Elders would nod knowingly when Alina passed by, and strangers who ventured to the village could not help but notice her calming presence. Her kindness, her laughter, her innate connection to the natural world all seemed to ripple beyond her small figure, touching the hearts of all who watched. And so, life unfolded at the edge of the forest, a delicate balance of warmth and envy. Alina, blissfully unaware of the storm her stepmother's heart harbored, moved through the village with quiet grace, her bond with nature a radiant thread weaving the villagers, the forest, and herself together. It was here, on the forest's edge, in the embrace of the trees, the river, and the creatures who followed her, that the story of the girl watched over by the forest would begin to unfold, setting the stage for the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. The air itself seemed to hum with the promise of what was to come, the forest leaning close as if whispering, "She belongs here, and nothing can truly harm her while her heart remains so pure." Alina's gaze lifted to the treetops, sunlight dancing in her eyes, and she knew not the full extent of the magic surrounding her, only that the woods, the river, and the life around her loved her in ways that words could scarcely capture. Morana, ever watchful, clenched her hands in quiet fury, unaware that the forces Alina did not yet understand were already moving, ready to protect the girl who walked among the green shadows of the forest edge. Alina, with her unassuming kindness and quiet courage, would soon face challenges that would test the bond between her and the living world around her. But even in those early days at the forest edge, the whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the gentle footsteps of creatures following her told a story of protection, reverence, and the quiet power of a heart untainted by envy or malice. It was a life suspended between admiration and jealousy, between love and lurking danger, and from this tension the true tale of Alina, the girl of the forest edge, began. Morana's envy of Alina grew like a shadow stretching across the household, darkening even the brightest corners of their home. Every time Alina laughed with the villagers, every time a bird alighted on her shoulder or a deer approached her in the forest, Morana felt a twist of anger and fear in her chest. She could see how the villagers admired her, how they would linger to watch her perform simple acts of kindness, and it burned her with a quiet, insidious rage. She whispered to herself that this girl, with her gentle heart and radiant charm, was stealing everything that could have belonged to Lyra, her own daughter, who deserved attention, praise, and respect. Lyra, a proud and haughty girl, had always tried to emulate Alina but could never capture her warmth. Morana often reminded Lyra that she should be more like Alina in appearance but not in heart, hoping to redirect some of the villagers' admiration toward her own child. Yet, no matter how much she praised Lyra, the people's affection for Alina could not be swayed. They were drawn to Alina's genuine kindness, to her laughter that seemed to carry life itself, and to her uncanny way of knowing the rhythms of the forest and the moods of its creatures. Morana's resentment festered. Unable to tolerate the contrast between her daughter's shortcomings and Alina's natural gifts, Morana began to plot. She first sowed small seeds of discontent, speaking behind Alina's back to the villagers. "She spends too much time with the animals," Morana would whisper to the elders. "Surely a child who prefers the company of birds and deer over people cannot bring blessings. Who knows what spirits she attracts at night?" Her words were designed to twist admiration into suspicion, to create a doubt that would fester over time. But Alina's goodness was a shield that even Morana's lies could not penetrate. People noticed that she treated everyone, whether human or animal, with the same gentle respect, and that her presence seemed to calm quarrels, mend wounds, and heal hearts. The villagers, though intrigued by Morana's insinuations, largely dismissed them, trusting the evidence of what they saw rather than the venom of jealous words. Morana's anger turned inward, a bitter realization that Alina's pure heart could not be sullied by rumor. Morana's envy extended beyond Alina to the forest itself. She envied the way the trees seemed to bend closer when Alina walked past, how the wind carried her laughter, how even the smallest creatures would seek her presence. She felt that the forest, which had always belonged to the village, was now in Alina's silent allegiance. Each time she watched Alina wander along the forest paths, talking quietly to the birds or brushing her hands over young saplings, Morana's chest tightened with a mixture of awe and resentment. Unable to interfere directly without arousing suspicion, Morana's plotting became subtler. She would deliberately encourage Lyra to act out, knowing that the contrast would make Alina appear more virtuous. She would plant seeds of fear in the minds of the villagers, hinting that a child with so much influence over the natural world might attract misfortune if left unchecked. These manipulations, though small, added tension to the household. Lyra would occasionally glare at Alina, her envy mirrored and magnified by their mother's whispered warnings. Yet Morana underestimated Alina's perceptiveness. The girl sensed the growing hostility in the household, felt the cold glances from Lyra, and noted her stepmother's whispered mutterings. But Alina's response was not anger or fear. Instead, she responded with compassion, tending to Lyra when she scraped her knee, comforting her when she cried over imagined slights, and continuing to care for the animals and plants around the village with the same gentle diligence. Alina's resilience and kindness only intensified Morana's jealousy, for she could not imagine how a heart could remain so pure in the face of such cold scheming. At night, when the household slept, Morana lay awake, plotting more elaborate measures. She imagined ways to send Alina deep into the forest, to hide her from the village entirely, and perhaps even to remove her influence permanently. Each thought filled her with a twisted satisfaction, a sense of potential triumph over a girl who seemed to embody everything she could not command or control. She was consumed by the fear that Alina's growing bond with the villagers and the forest would eclipse Lyra's life completely, leaving her daughter in shadow and Alina basking in light. The tension in the household became palpable. Lyra, unsure whether to resent Alina or be grateful for her constant kindness, vacillated between envy and admiration. Mirana's moods grew sharper, her words more cutting, her glances more loaded with concealed threat. Alina, aware of the shift in atmosphere, did not retaliate. Instead, she spent more time in the forest, letting the wind, the trees, and the creatures offer solace from the tightening grip of her stepmother's jealousy. As days passed, Mirana's envy matured into a tangible plan. She began to envision Alina's removal not as cruelty, but as justice for her daughter and herself. The villagers continued to speak in hushed tones about the girl at the forest edge, the one whom the animals and the earth seemed to favor, but Mirana dismissed them. In her mind, she was preparing to claim the balance, to ensure that the household's attention, wealth, and honor would rest solely with Lyra, and that Alina's natural charm, her connection to the forest, and her influence over the village would be severed entirely. Yet, despite the plotting, Alina's heart remained untarnished. She continued to care for the animals, nurture the plants, and lend a hand to any villager who asked. Her laughter rang through the forest paths, a melody untouched by fear or resentment, and her presence radiated a quiet power that Mirana could neither comprehend nor control. The girl's gentle spirit had become intertwined with the life of the forest itself, and even as Mirana schemed, the invisible threads of protection surrounding Alina grew stronger, weaving a story of innocence, courage, and resilience that the stepmother's envy could not undo. In this quiet war of hearts, Mirana's jealousy was a storm, and Alina's purity was the calm that refused to be broken. The seeds of envy had been planted, but the tree of kindness and resilience that Alina nurtured continued to grow, stretching toward the light that no darkness could wholly conceal. And as the forest whispered around her, Alina remained unaware of the full measure of danger, trusting only in the harmony that had always guided her steps and sustained her spirit. Mirana had long prepared for this moment, her envy having solidified into a plan that left no room for hesitation. The morning was crisp, the sunlight filtering through the canopy of the forest edge in golden slants that danced over Alina's hair. "Go into the woods and gather the herbs I need for the evening's feast," Mirana instructed, her voice deceptively calm. Alina, ever obedient and trusting, nodded, her basket already in hand. She had walked this path many times before, collecting leaves, roots, and flowers, unaware that this day would mark a turning point in her life. As Alina ventured deeper into the forest, she noticed that the familiar sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves felt muted, almost as if the forest itself sensed something unusual. The path that usually guided her seemed longer, winding more sharply, and the sunlight dimmed under the thickening canopy. Yet Alina continued, trusting her knowledge of the forest and the intuition that had always guided her steps. She whispered to herself, "The forest watches, and it protects those who mean no harm," hoping the trees and animals around her would offer comfort. Hours passed, and the scent of the village faded behind her. When she finally stopped to rest, Alina realized the forest felt different. The air carried a chill she did not expect, and the once familiar paths seemed distorted. Panic began to flutter faintly in her chest, but she pushed it down, remembering her mother's teachings about calmness and resourcefulness. She thought of Mirana's eyes, sharp and cold, and a creeping realization began to form: she had been led away with intent. Alina searched for signs of the path back, recognizing certain trees, markings, and small rocks that would have guided her in the past. Yet each familiar landmark seemed twisted, confusing her sense of direction. She called softly to the forest, "Guide me, friends, as you always have," and waited for the wind to carry her plea. The forest responded with a gentle rustling, a sign that she was not entirely alone, yet no clear path revealed itself. Meanwhile, back in the village, whispers began to circulate. Some villagers had noticed Alina leaving the house that morning, basking in the sunlight, her basket swinging gently from her arm. They knew her stepmother's envy well and had long feared her cruelty, but many hesitated to act. Fear of retribution, the weight of old superstitions, and the belief that Alina's connection to the forest might protect her discouraged anyone from following her into the unknown depths. Only a few elders watched quietly, their hearts heavy, uncertain if intervention would save the girl or condemn them to Mirana's wrath. Alina, now realizing the truth of her abandonment, felt a pang of sorrow, yet her heart remained steadfast. She sat on a moss-covered root, breathing deeply, and looked around at the towering trees, the twisted vines, and the small creatures that peered cautiously from the underbrush. She reminded herself that she was never truly alone, that the forest had always sheltered and guided her. Her mind turned to her stepmother's face, the coldness and envy she had witnessed in secret, and Alina steeled herself. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage and wisdom. As dusk approached, the forest took on a surreal quality. Shadows stretched long and dark, yet glimmers of light filtered through gaps in the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Alina realized she would have to find food and shelter for the night. She gathered edible plants, identified streams with clean water, and built a small refuge beneath a large, protective tree. Even as her body ached and uncertainty gnawed at her, she whispered to the wind and trees, "Thank you for sheltering me. I trust you as you have always guided me." The forest seemed to respond, a subtle warmth and quiet presence wrapping around her like a protective cloak. Night fell fully, and with it came the chorus of nocturnal life, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of owls, the rustle of unseen creatures. Alina felt the forest's energy pulsing gently around her. She understood that Morana had intended to remove her from all she knew, but she also recognized that the forest could not be subdued by human cruelty. The trees, the animals, and the spirits of the land were allies she had yet to fully understand, and in their silent watchfulness she felt hope rekindle. Throughout the night, Alina stayed alert, listening to the sounds of the forest, learning its rhythms more deeply than she had before. Each step she had taken into the forest, though guided by deception, became a lesson in resilience and awareness. By dawn, Alina was no longer a mere girl abandoned by her stepmother. She was a part of the forest, attuned to its signs and strengthened by her own resourcefulness. The villagers may have feared the forest's depth, and Morana may have plotted in darkness, but Alina had begun a journey that would transform her, revealing her true connection to the land and the power that came from courage, kindness, and unwavering faith in the protection of nature itself. Alina's first night alone in the forest stretched endlessly, each shadow seeming to hide unknown terrors. As dusk fell, the thick canopy swallowed the last rays of sunlight, plunging the world into a deep, unfamiliar darkness. The sounds of the village, laughter, chatter, the familiar clatter of daily life, were gone, replaced by the rustle of leaves, distant calls of nocturnal birds, and the subtle scurrying of small creatures. Her heart raced and fear gnawed at her resolve, but Alina reminded herself of the lessons her mother had taught her, that nature is both a teacher and a protector, and that courage is found even when the world seems to conspire against you. As night deepened, Alina stumbled over twisted roots and uneven ground, her small lantern flickering faintly in the wind. She paused frequently, listening to the sounds around her, calling softly to the trees and animals for guidance and protection. "I mean no harm," she whispered. "Please help me find my place tonight." The forest responded subtly. Branches swayed as if acknowledging her plea, leaves rustled gently overhead, and a soft breeze carried a soothing, almost melodic, whisper. It was as though the forest itself were alive, aware of her presence, and willing to aid her if she showed respect and humility. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she needed food. With careful observation, she identified edible roots and small berries, recalling the instructions her mother had given her for foraging safely. Each movement became a test of patience and observation, as the shadows around her shifted and her imagination painted shapes from the dim light filtering through the leaves. Alina's hands shook as she gathered food, but she spoke softly to the plants and to the wind, thanking them for their sustenance. The forest, in turn, seemed to ease its tension, the wind carrying away some of her fear, replacing it with a subtle warmth that wrapped around her like a protective cloak. As night progressed, Alina encountered the more challenging creatures of the forest. She heard the low growl of a distant predator, saw glowing eyes reflecting in the darkness, and felt the sudden snap of twigs beneath unseen paws. Her instinct was to run, yet she recalled her mother's teachings. Fear should be acknowledged, not ignored, and respect for the forest's inhabitants was essential. She froze, breathing steadily, and whispered to the predator in the language of her heart, a quiet plea for peace. Miraculously, the growl receded, replaced by the rustling of leaves as the creature moved on, leaving her unharmed. The loneliness of the night pressed upon her, a heavy weight that made her eyes water. She knelt on the forest floor, letting her tears fall freely onto the earth. In that moment, something remarkable happened. The wind picked up, swirling gently around her, carrying her sorrow as if it were a gift rather than a burden. The branches of the trees bent toward her, forming a protective canopy, and faint, glowing shapes seemed to emerge in the darkness, guiding her gaze to a safer spot to rest. Even the nocturnal creatures, owls, small mammals and insects, gathered nearby in silent watchfulness, forming an unseen circle of guardianship around the girl who had been abandoned. Alina realized then that the forest was not merely a place of danger, but of connection and learning. Every rustle, every flicker of light, every whisper of wind carried a lesson about patience, attentiveness and trust. She began to see the night not as a threat, but as a companion, a living entity that could guide and protect her if she remained open to its signs. The fear that had gripped her earlier transformed into cautious curiosity, and she started to move with more confidence, exploring the small clearing she had chosen for rest. Before long she found a natural shelter beneath a large, ancient tree. Its broad roots formed a cradle, its thick branches overhead forming a canopy that shielded her from the night wind. She gathered leaves and soft moss to lie upon, whispering her gratitude to the tree and to the forest around her. The wind rustled softly through the branches, almost like a lullaby, and the glowing eyes of distant animals reflected a quiet approval. Alina felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a profound sense of belonging she had not expected. As she drifted into a restless but peaceful sleep, Alina understood that the forest had accepted her. Her first night alone, once terrifying, had revealed a hidden truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to trust, to observe, and to honor the life around you. The shadows no longer seemed hostile, the creatures no longer frightening, and the trees themselves seemed to hum softly with a protective energy. Alina closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow she would awaken stronger, more attuned to the forest's rhythm, and ready to learn from the living world that had become her sanctuary. Alina awoke the next morning to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the dense canopy, a golden light that danced across the forest floor. She stretched, feeling the firmness of the earth beneath her and the gentle sway of leaves above, as if the forest itself were breathing alongside her. Her first night alone had taught her the importance of patience and observation, but the day ahead promised lessons even deeper, lessons that could only be understood by opening her heart fully to the life around her. She began her exploration carefully, moving along the winding paths created by animal tracks and natural clearings. The first discovery came in the form of plants she had previously overlooked. Each leaf, each petal seemed to respond to her presence, a subtle movement or glow guiding her hands. Alina remembered the herbal remedies her mother, Morana, had once taught her, and she began experimenting, gently touching leaves, crushing petals, and observing the reactions of the plants. Soon she realized that certain plants could soothe pain, others could cleanse water, and some even seemed to carry a faint warmth when held, as though they absorbed and shared the energy of the forest. She whispered words of gratitude to each, thanking them for their cooperation and guidance. As she moved further, she discovered a small stream, its water sparkling as it meandered through roots and stones. Kneeling beside it, Alina dipped her hands into the cool flow and felt a subtle vibration beneath her fingertips. The stream seemed to respond to her thoughts, carrying ripples and patterns that almost resembled words. With concentration she realized she could sense the messages the water carried, news of animals upstream, changes in weather, and the hidden currents that shaped the forest's life. She spent hours learning to interpret these ripples, speaking softly as she moved her hands through the water, asking questions and listening for answers in the subtle movements. The forest creatures too began to reveal themselves more openly. Birds perched nearby, watching her with bright, intelligent eyes, and small mammals approached cautiously, sensing her kindness and lack of threat. She learned to mimic the subtle sounds of the forest, a chirp here, a rustle there, and soon found that animals responded to her guidance. A deer approached when called softly, following her through the underbrush. A group of birds circled overhead, alerting her to hidden dangers. Even the nocturnal creatures she had feared the night before seemed to trust her presence, allowing her to witness their secretive lives without harm. Alina discovered that the forest was not merely a place to survive, but a community with its own rhythms, rules, and communication. She began to notice the interconnectedness of everything around her, how water nourished the plants, how plants offered shelter and food to animals, and how every creature played a role in maintaining balance. Her empathy for the forest grew, and in return, the forest began to embrace her. She sensed the wind guiding her steps along safe paths, the earth providing soft moss for resting, and trees subtly shifting their branches to form protective arches as she passed. With each passing day, Alina experimented with her growing abilities. She learned to create poultices from leaves to treat minor cuts and bruises, using the water from the stream to enhance their effectiveness. She observed which herbs soothed pain, which promoted energy and which calmed fear, compiling a silent knowledge that would one day help her people. She spoke to the animals, gently encouraging them to assist in her tasks, and found that they obeyed not out of fear, but recognition of her respect and understanding of their ways. The forest became a teacher, guiding Alina in lessons of patience, observation, and humility. She realized that true power lay not in commanding or forcing, but in listening, understanding, and working in harmony with the living world. Every rustle of leaves, every ripple in the stream, every bird song carried meaning, and she learned to read these messages with precision and care. The initial fear that had gripped her during her first night was replaced by a profound sense of connection and belonging. By the end of the day, Alina had created a small sanctuary near the stream, a place where she could rest, observe, and practice the wisdom she was accumulating. She carefully laid out herbs, marked safe paths, and even fashioned small shelters for animals who might need refuge. The forest seemed to acknowledge her efforts, the air carrying a soft, approving rustle of leaves. She felt herself becoming not just a visitor in this world, but a part of it, a guardian and a student simultaneously. Alina lay beneath the branches of a protective tree that evening, watching the sky turn shades of gold and amber through the leaves. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying subtle messages she understood now, messages of encouragement and guidance. She realized she had transformed, no longer just a frightened girl abandoned in the woods, but a learner of the forest's deep wisdom, a presence the trees and creatures recognized and trusted. And as she closed her eyes to rest, she felt a quiet joy, knowing that every lesson from the forest would strengthen her heart, her mind, and her spirit for the challenges yet to come. Morana stood proudly at the center of the village square, her chest lifted and her voice carrying above the murmurs of the townspeople. "My daughter will inherit all she deserves," she proclaimed, her eyes flashing with haughty certainty. "As for Alina, she is lost to the forest. That girl will find no path back to us." Lyra, standing beside her mother, nodded impatiently, tapping her foot and casting glances toward the distant treeline where Alina had disappeared. She wished, with the impatience of youth and the sharp sting of envy, that some curse might fall upon the girl, that the forest might turn treacherous and punish her for the favor the villagers once showed her. Yet the forest had other plans, and nature began to assert itself in subtle but undeniable ways. The first sign came at dawn when the crops near Morana's home, once flourishing under careful tending, drooped and wilted. Leaves shriveled under the morning sun as if refusing to soak in the water that had always nourished them. Maru, the village elder who had long warned of respecting nature, noticed the change and murmured to his neighbors that the earth seemed unsettled. "The forest does not forget," he said softly, watching the plants tremble in the gentle wind. Animals too began to shift their patterns. Chickens refused to enter Morana's yard, scratching at the ground nervously before darting back towards safer, shaded areas. Dogs that had once roamed freely around the compound now barked and whimpered, their gaze fixed toward the treeline, as though sensing something beyond human sight. Even the goats that grazed nearby showed hesitation, pausing mid-step, ears twitching toward the distant forest. The villagers whispered nervously among themselves, noting the strange behavior of creatures that had always obeyed their commands without question. Morana dismissed the signs at first, waving them away with an arrogant laugh. "These are trifles," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Lyra's frown deepened, her impatience growing. The girl wanted action, a spectacle of power that would demonstrate Alina's helplessness. But with each passing day, the forest seemed to respond with subtle defiance. Leaves rustled with unusual intensity, forming shapes that almost resembled warnings. Breezes shifted against the wind, carrying scents unfamiliar and sharp, brushing against Morana's face with a whisper of accusation. Even the birds, previously caged and tame, began to circle the skies above her house in tight, synchronized patterns, their cries echoing like a chorus of judgment. The villagers could not ignore the patterns. Rumors spread like wildfire, a mixture of awe and fear coloring every word. "The forest favors her," an elderly woman whispered as she passed Morana in the market, her eyes cast down to avoid confrontation. "The girl in the woods is not lost, she is becoming one with what protects her." Others nodded, recounting tales of unseen lights in the forest at night, the soft glow of movement between the trees, and the distant sound of harmonious whispers that seemed almost human. As the days turned to weeks, Morana's confidence began to erode. Her boastful demeanor, once impenetrable, cracked under the weight of continuous misfortune. Crops continued to fail, the animals' avoidance persisted, and even the villagers who had supported her hesitated, sensing the invisible influence that the forest exerted. Lyra's anger morphed into anxiety. She watched the skies and the treeline, fidgeting, wondering when the girl who had been banished would return. Each rustle in the leaves and each shifting shadow seemed a silent message, a reminder that Alina's absence did not diminish her presence, and that the forest itself had chosen a champion. Night brought its own manifestations. Soft moonlight filtered through the canopy at the forest edge, spilling faint beams toward Morana's home. The light illuminated strange patterns on the ground, twisted shadows that seemed almost alive. Sometimes, distant echoes of gentle laughter, calming yet firm, floated across the wind, carrying an undeniable sense of authority and peace. Morana found herself awake at odd hours, staring toward the forest with growing unease, unable to dismiss the feeling that her enemy, though unseen, had become stronger than she could ever imagine. The arrogance of Morana and Lyra had blinded them to the subtle yet undeniable truth. Alina was not simply a girl abandoned, she was a force intertwined with the forest's power. Every plant that wilted near their home, every hesitant animal, every whispering breeze was a testament to the growing bond between Alina and the natural world. The forest was teaching the villagers a lesson in humility, and even Morana, in her pride, could not escape its influence. Fear began to replace her hubris, the first seed of understanding that power taken through jealousy was fragile, while power nurtured with patience, respect, and kindness could endure. Thus, the days passed with the stepfamily's arrogance met by the patient, silent vigilance of the forest. Morana and Lyra had sought control and dominance, only to discover that forces greater than human schemes were at play. And while they plotted and fretted, Alina continued her lessons in growth within the trees, her presence invisible yet unmistakable, preparing for the day when she would return not as a victim, but as the true queen of the forest that had chosen her. As dawn broke over the dense canopy, Alina walked deeper into the heart of the forest, the air thick with the earthy scent of moss and damp leaves. The sun's first rays filtered through the branches, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. The trees seemed to lean closer as she passed, their leaves rustling in a language only she could understand. Birds perched silently in the high branches, watching her approach with attentive eyes, while small creatures peeked from behind ferns and rocks, their movements careful yet curious. It was a moment suspended between the ordinary and the miraculous, as if the forest itself held its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. Alina reached a small clearing where the oldest trees of the forest stood in a protective circle. Their massive roots intertwined beneath the soil, forming natural arches and steps that seemed to lead toward the very heart of the woods. She knelt on the soft earth, feeling the pulse of life beneath her fingers, a rhythm that echoed the beating of her own heart. The wind began to stir, gentle at first, brushing her hair across her face, carrying the subtle fragrance of wildflowers and the distant aroma of pine resin. Then, as if awakened by her presence, the forest responded in kind. Vines loosened themselves from their branches, twisting and curling in midair, while flowers bloomed instantly, their petals unfurling in delicate displays of color. From above, the canopy seemed to part, allowing a single beam of sunlight to fall directly upon her. Within that golden light, leaves and blossoms began to weave themselves together, spinning and twisting with an intelligence and grace that defied explanation. The leaves wrapped into a circular form, delicate yet strong, while the flowers threaded through like jewels set into a crown. Tendrils of vine gently braided themselves along the edges, securing the crown as though it had been fashioned by the forest for her alone. Alina's eyes widened in awe, reflecting the luminescent greens, reds, and purples that glimmered in the morning light. She rose slowly, feeling the weight and warmth of the crown settle upon her head, not heavy but grounding, as if it connected her to every root and branch in the surrounding woods. The wind circled her in playful spirals, brushing against her cheeks and carrying faint whispers, the hushed voices of animals, the sighs of the trees, and the secret hum of the earth. Birds swooped in arcs overhead, their wings brushing the air with musical rhythms that harmonized with the rustling leaves. Small creatures emerged from their hiding places, surrounding her in silent reverence, and even the sunlight seemed to linger, illuminating her as if recognizing her as part of the forest itself. As Alina stood in the clearing, she sensed a new power within her. It was not a force of dominance or fear but a gentle, guiding presence that connected all living things. She could feel the water trickling beneath the roots, the ants marching with purposeful rhythm, and the roots of the trees spreading deep into the soil like veins of life. The crown seemed to amplify this connection, every leaf and flower acting as an extension of the forest's awareness, anointing her as its chosen steward. A soft breeze carried her own thoughts outward, mingling with the forest's consciousness, creating a silent dialogue of trust and understanding. Wandering villagers who had strayed into the forest to gather herbs or hunt noticed the transformation. From a distance, they saw Alina standing in the clearing, a figure crowned with radiant leaves and blossoms, bathed in sunlight and encircled by the gentle flutter of wings and rustle of foliage. Wordlessly, they fell to their knees, recognizing in her the harmony between human and nature. Even the spirits of the forest, usually invisible and elusive, seemed to converge in the clearing, their presence marked by shimmering motes of light and a warmth that enveloped Alina. She smiled softly, bowing her head in acknowledgement of the forest's blessing and her role within it. From that day onward, Alina became the forest queen. Animals and spirits alike heeded her guidance, the trees shifted gently to mark her path, and wandering villagers who encountered her left with hearts full of awe and respect. The crown of leaves and flowers remained on her head, alive with the forest's energy, ever growing and changing with the seasons, symbolizing her unity with the woodland and its eternal rhythm. Wherever she walked, the earth seemed to respond. Flowers opened in her footsteps, vines curved toward her, and even the wind adjusted its course to carry her whispers. The forest had claimed its queen, and she had embraced her place, forever intertwined with the life and spirit of the woods. Alina approached the edge of the village at dusk, the sky painted in streaks of crimson and gold, the fading sunlight catching the leaves of the nearby forest like scattered sparks. Her steps were light yet purposeful, each one resonating with the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. The forest seemed alive behind her, branches swaying as if whispering encouragement, roots shifting gently, creating a subtle hum that blended with the wind. Birds perched in the trees watched silently, their eyes sharp and knowing, while the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth marked the unseen audience of the woodland. Alina's crown of intertwined leaves, flowers and vines glowed faintly, a soft iridescent light that marked her as the forest queen. As she stepped into the open clearing that led toward her former home, Morana and Lyra were waiting, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and anger. Morana's eyes narrowed at the sight of Alina, her lips pressing into a thin line as she took in the aura of authority and calm that surrounded the girl she had once scorned. Lyra, standing beside her mother, looked unsure, caught between loyalty to her mother and the undeniable truth emanating from Alina. The air felt charged, vibrating with tension, yet also with the subtle energy of the forest that followed Alina faithfully. Alina stopped a few steps away from them and raised her arms slightly, palms open, a gesture both commanding and conciliatory. The forest responded immediately. Trees along the clearing seemed to grow taller and closer, their branches intertwining to form a natural barrier, isolating the trio from the rest of the village. Vines and flowering tendrils crept along the ground and edges of the clearing, circling Morana and Lyra in a delicate but undeniable embrace, signaling that the forest was actively participating in this confrontation. Alina's voice rang out, steady and calm, carrying both authority and compassion. "Morana," she said, her tone even but infused with the quiet power of the woods, "the truths you have tried to bury are now clear for all to see. Your lies, your envy, and your cruelty cannot hide from the life and spirit that surrounds me." The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves overhead and carrying her words across the clearing. Small lights, like glowing motes, drifted through the air, circling Morana and Lyra, reflecting the forest's acknowledgement of Alina's authority. Morana's face flushed with anger. "You think this forest can save you? You think it will protect a child against her own family?" Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the insecurity beneath her fury. But even as she spoke, a vine unfurled, brushing her arm gently, and flowers bloomed along its length, unmistakably marking the forest's allegiance. Lyra gasped, stepping back involuntarily, as the soft golden glow of the crown on Alina's head brightened. Alina's gaze softened as she looked at Lyra. "You have seen the truth," she said gently. "The forest honors me because my heart is pure, and my purpose is for the good of all. You do not need to follow your mother in envy or deceit. Choose to see, to understand, and you will be free of the shadow she has cast over your heart." The forest seemed to lean closer, branches swaying in a slow, deliberate rhythm as if echoing her words. A chorus of birds took flight, their wings creating a soft symphony that enveloped the clearing. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and the rich earth, carrying a sense of renewal and justice. Morana's fists clenched, but she could not move, rooted by the forest's subtle strength, feeling the weight of her own actions pressing down upon her. Alina stepped forward slowly, her crown glowing brighter with every step, petals and leaves shimmering in the dusk light. She lifted her hands and the vines at Morana's feet began to grow upward, curling gently to surround her, not as punishment but as a reminder of the life she had tried to suppress. The whispers of the forest seemed to echo in her ears, murmuring truths and histories that had been ignored and silenced. Your envy has harmed many, Alina continued, her voice clear and unwavering. But it is never too late to choose differently. Witness the strength of the heart that acts with kindness and purpose. Lyra's eyes filled with tears as she realized the truth in Alina's words, the innocence she had envied now shining with undeniable power. She looked at her mother, then at the forest queen and whispered, I see it now. Mirana's anger faltered as the vines and branches retracted slightly, not out of mercy but acknowledgement of Lyra's recognition of truth. The villagers, who had gathered at a distance upon hearing the commotion, watched silently as the scene unfolded. The forest and Alina were inseparable, a living demonstration of integrity, compassion, and the subtle, enduring power of nature. Alina lowered her arms, the glow of her crown dimming gently as the forest relaxed its protective circle, though it remained vigilant. Let this be a lesson, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. True strength does not come from deceit, from envy, or from trying to dominate another. It comes from harmony, respect, and the courage to act with a pure heart. Remember this and live in balance with the world around you. A soft breeze swept through the clearing, carrying the scent of blossoms and the whispered acknowledgement of the forest's approval. Lyra knelt before Alina, tears falling freely, and Morana, for the first time, felt the weight of shame settle upon her shoulders. The forest queen did not strike or curse. Her presence alone taught what words could not fully convey. The trees swayed gently as if bowing, flowers bloomed anew along the path Alina had taken, and the villagers understood that a new era had begun, one guided not by fear or deception, but by the wisdom and grace of the girl crowned by the forest itself. From that moment, Alina's return to the village edge marked the restoration of harmony. Her stepmother's schemes lay exposed, Lyra learned the strength of empathy and understanding, and the forest, ever watchful, remained a steadfast ally to the girl it had claimed as its queen. The crown of leaves and flowers continued to shimmer atop Alina's head, a living symbol of her bond with the woods, the villagers, and the enduring truth that kindness, courage, and a pure heart always prevail.